This is Lily's Whisper by J. Russell. Sometimes at the edge of consciousness, on that unsteady divide between my waking and dreaming life, I'll hear her wonderful little song, the spectral voice of memory, I suppose, all in my head. But then, isn't everything? An orderly asked me if anything was wrong. A lot, I thought, but I told him I was fine and forced myself to walk on in. I'd been standing, frozen with dread, outside the door to my grandmother's hospital room. I stared at the small white paper with her name in blurry type. Bernstein Sally, no middle initial. When I was little, I used to ask her why it was that she had no middle name. She always answered with the same joke. We were too poor to afford one. It drove me crazy because it didn't make any sense. Now I smiled thinking about it. Okay, Grandma, I thought, let's get this over with. My Aunt Lily died when I was a kid. She was actually my great-aunt, my mother's aunt, Grandma Sally's sister. Although she didn't live far away from the house where I grew up, I never knew Lily very well. Once or twice a year, someone would bring her along to a family gathering. She couldn't drive, but she always showered the children with fruit candies and cheap but wonderful presents. Unlike my mother's other seemingly born ancient aunts and uncles, Lily seemed not just to like children, but to understand them, to think like them, even though she was the only one without kids of her own. I never much cared for those other relatives, who were somehow sort of scary to me in their sear way, but I was always happy to see Lily. It wasn't just that she treated us differently or better, though she did. She somehow seemed utterly apart from her siblings. Her face betrayed the same harsh Eastern European stock. There was a gentle quality to her that none of the others possessed. A humor in her eyes and playfulness to her touch, which made the cloying affections of her shrewish kin all the more glaring. I suppose I realized there was something unusual about Lily, something secret, from the way the others talked about her. They always lowered their voices when Lily's name came up, so she was something to hide or to be ashamed of. If not for the fact of our Jewishness, I think they would have crossed themselves at the mention of her name. Even when Lily was in the room, the others spoke about her as if she wasn't there, or as if she was dead. Perhaps the reason the children identified with her so closely was because, among the other adults, she was treated as if she, too, was of no real consequence. Hospital rooms are like shopping malls in their dislocated uniformity. Stepping into one, whether in Los Angeles or West Palm Beach, removes you from the normal fabric of local time and space into the antiseptic, spiritually liminal realm of the sick and dying. The bed nearest the door had been stripped of linens, and I had the sudden ominous sense that the last person to occupy it had not walked out on their own. A tall plastic curtain had been drawn around the far bed, the elongated shadows of the guardrails silhouetted like prison bars on the laminated barrier. As I got closer, I could hear raspy breathing. The curtain hadn't been pulled all the way around. As I reached the foot of the bed, I saw my grandmother for the first time in almost 10 years. Sally had always been a short, plump woman, but age and illness had shrunk her down so that lost under her covers, she looked like an old ventriloquist dummy. She stirred in uneasy sleep, and I saw that she was little more than a bag of withered flesh. The sight of her reminded me of a balloon you'd find behind the couch 2 weeks after a party, limp and wrinkled and only vaguely suggestive of its original shape. Her skin had stretched and sagged beyond the capacity of her diminutive frame. As a child, I'd always marveled at my grandmother's upper arms. They were fatty and thick and dangled like jowls, jiggling wildly with every gesture she made. Now I saw that the folds of skin remained, but the meat beneath them had dissolved, and the flesh hung limply as a ghost ship's sails. Her stained dentures swam in a plastic cup on the Formica night table, and her hollow mouth drooped open. A glistening thread of saliva trailed down her chin, and tufts of thin, colorless hair dotted her mottled scalp. In fact, the sight of her made me feel a little queasy. I started to walk back out, when her eyes opened, nailing me to the floor. She stared at me, but I wasn't certain she could see me, or if she could, that she recognized who I was. Last time I'd seen her had been at my mother's funeral almost a decade before. Despite her numerous illnesses and various surgeries, I had spoken with Sally only once since then, when she had called on my birthday. It was a hellish call, in which she quizzed me accusatorially about my lack of contact with her. Like all good New York Jews, she and my grandfather had retired to Florida when I was a kid. As a result, I'd never been particularly close to her. From an adult's point of view, I never knew her at all. Though I still carried a certain latent guilt over having ignored her so in her declining years, especially after her first husband, then my mother, died. It was primarily that lurking guilt, along with my father springing for the cost of the airfare, which had served to bring me all the way from my home in Los Angeles to a Florida hospital for this reunion. A reunion for which Sally had hysterically and inexplicably begged. The silence was broken only by my grandmother's fractured breathing. She scanned me up and down, but her only movement was a slight rise and fall of her chest. I shifted nervously and cleared my throat. I was about to identify myself when, with a low moan, she pulled herself up against the pillow, slowly lifted an arthritic hand. "Brucey," she said. I came around to the side of the bed and took her hand. Felt as light as a styrofoam coffee cup, the skin hard and cool to the touch. "Hi, Grandma," I croaked. She left her hand in mine for a moment, then drew it back beneath the covers. Her eyes never left mine. "You're so thin," she said, and coughed. Then she farted wetly. Felt slightly embarrassed, but she didn't seem bothered. "And a beard, too." "Yeah," I said, scratching my chin. "That's right." She didn't reply. The tension could have been cut with, say, a small sword, 6-foot blade. "So," I said, posing the stupidest question of all time, "how are you?" Here is everything that I knew about Lily's life. She was the youngest sibling of the large Petrowski family, something like 8 or 9 children in all. They were dirt poor and lived like sharecroppers in seriously anti-Semitic Poland at the turn of the century. Neither my great-grandparents nor any of their children were educated. They all worked at maintaining their subsistence-level farm. Most of the family emigrated to America in the early years of the century with a great human tide that fled the miseries of the Old World. A couple of the older siblings stayed behind, but the rest, including Lily, settled in Brooklyn. While the various children who became my mother's aunts and uncles started families of their own in America, Lily never married. She lived out her drab life and died alone in the basement flat of a Brooklyn tenement. In the end, no one even knew exactly when she died. Her body was found by a stranger because of the stench rising from her corpse. I only remember 3 things about Lily. Once, when she came to visit, she brought along a new puppy. It was a mad brown ball of energy. And what, even at the time, I recognized as pure Lily style, she named it Wolfie. My cousins and I spent a wondrous day chasing the dog around the small yard of my parents' suburban New York house. Lily watched and clapped along in delight. She seemed, I remember, not to handle the dog very well, so she didn't understand that it was a living thing and not a toy. But her pleasure in its company was clear. A couple weeks later, I overheard my mother tell my father that Wolfie had been run over by a car. I also remember a simple little song Lily used to sing to us. My mother knew it too, probably learned it from Lily, and often sang it to me as a lullaby. Lily would sing in Polish mostly, but sometimes in English. My mother only knew the English version. It went, "Meet me at midnight, my sweet one, by the tree in the garden where the white roses grow. Meet me at midnight, my darling, but don't let anyone know. Never let anyone know." The song had a tender, happy, sad melody, and to this day it summons, however fleetingly, that childhood feeling of utter safeness and security simply doesn't exist in maturity. The third thing I remember is not so much about Lily as about myself. It concerns her death, and I recall it, even after all these years, with some shame. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and my best friend and I were playing in the house one day when the phone rang. My mother picked it up in the kitchen while I eavesdropped, as usual, from the hall. Sally was on the line. I heard my mother start to cry. I understood that it was because Lily had died. I knew Lily was my mother's favorite aunt. I stood there listening to her cry when my friend came down the hall to see what was up. As soon as he looked at me, I began to laugh. He kept asking what was so funny. Each time I tried to tell him, the laughter grew more hysterical. I couldn't stop myself. We retreated to the safety of my room, and I told him what had happened. I don't think I'll ever forget the look on his face. In the years since, I've tried to rationalize my behavior without real success. I've told myself that the laughter was a child's nervous response to the mystery of death, or cathartic emotional release. Hell, maybe it's even true. For a time I thought that I'd blown the incident out of proportion, but years later, that same friend and I were talking, and he asked me about that day and my laughter. It had stuck with him, too. I managed to change the topic of conversation, but I've never forgotten the shame. I leaned against the hall's cool tiles, waiting for a nurse to finish helping Sally with the bedpan. I heard the gulping flush of a toilet, and a moment later the nurse came out and nodded at me. The room stank of shit and piss, but I pretended not to notice. Pulled a chair over next to the bed, and as I sat down, I saw that Sally had put her teeth in. Her eyes looked a little clearer, too. Her wasted body still suggested the proximity of the scythe, but she seemed more alert. I hoped, able to explain her desperate need to see me. "I know you don't care so much for me," she began. Seeing my burgeoning protest, held up a finger. No, you don't have to say. It's all right." I sat back in the chair and exhaled a deep breath. I felt desperately trapped, like being stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic at the entrance to a long tunnel. "I know also you're only here because your father insisted. This I don't care either." That was true as well. Not only had my father paid for my ticket, he'd seriously guilted me into making the haul from California at all. "I have something to ask you, but first I have a story to tell. It's to do with your Aunt Lily. I don't know if you even remember." I nodded, suddenly more interested. Though Sally didn't ask, I recited the outline of what I knew and remembered. I didn't mention how I laughed the day Lily died. "What you say is right. I don't remember a dog, but with Lily it could be. Always she did such things. This is like the skin of the apple, what you know. The fruit is underneath. I'll tell you now, and you should understand it's not so sweet." "Lily we always hated," Sally said. She stared past me out the window as she spoke. "When she was born, she was too small, like to die, and Mama was very sick. They have what to call it today. Premature," I said. "Yes, I think. Always weak Lily was, and so tiny. For a long time she didn't walk or talk. A terrible burden she was on us. We lived, all of us then, in a little house like you don't know. Always Lily had to have special. We all had to make do with less so she could get. Terrible jealous it made us. My father came first to America and sent back money for the children to go one by one, but Mama died soon after we all arrived. But this you probably know. Lily was then a big girl already, but still she was not right. Slow she was, and difficult. But with Mama gone, Lily wasn't special anymore, and terrible mean we could be to her, like how we always wanted." My grandmother laid back against the pillows and closed her eyes. Her breathing became shallow and even. I thought perhaps she dozed off. Then she opened her eyes again and stared up at the ceiling. "When Bella died—" "Whoa, wait a minute. Who's Bella?" Sally shook her head. "I forget, Boosie. These people, some you never met. But to me, it's all like yesterday. Bella was the oldest sister. She married and stayed yet in Poland. You know, I don't think I've ever even heard the name." Sally only nodded, but somehow communicated to me such is the sad nature of time and memory. She went on. "Bella died from the typhus, left alone a husband and a little boy. Such could not be in those days, and something had to be done. We saw then a chance to get rid of Lily. Lily had no husband, and who would ever marry such a thing? Bella's husband we knew from before, a hard man, like only in Poland you find. We knew it was a bad thing to send Lily to him, but jealousy is—" Sally shook her head. "She went, you know, it was not so long before the war. We didn't know then from Hitler, but even if we did, I can't say sure that we would have done different." "Christ," I muttered. I'd never heard any of this before. What happened? Who would have thought? Lily married to Bella's husband and took the little boy to her heart, and she was happy. Life there wasn't easy, but Lily made for herself a place. The baby she thought of like her own, Bella's husband she even maybe could love, who can say? Sally laid back again, and I could see she was exhausted. She could barely keep her eyes open. Maybe you should take a little nap, Grandma, I said. I was intrigued by her story and puzzled as to where it was leading. She nodded and offered me a little smile. She was asleep before I got out of the chair. I waited around the hospital for a while, ogling the student nurses and drinking bitter coffee from a machine. I saw a nurse go in and out of my grandmother's room and ran after her. She told me that Sally would probably sleep for a few hours at least. "Can you tell me," I started. Felt a little silly asking, actually. "What?" the nurse asked. "What exactly is wrong with her?" I knew from my father that Sally had undergone some treatments for cancer a while back, and at least one hip had been replaced fairly recently, but I didn't actually know why she was hospitalized now. "Some heart trouble, bad circulatory problems. Mostly she's old," the nurse said. "She's plain worn out." She must have seen I wasn't too thrilled with the answer and sort of shrugged. "You're Brucey, aren't you?" "Bruce," I said, clearing my throat. "She's been going on and on about you." "Really?" I asked. "Do you have any idea why?" "No, she wouldn't say," she said. She started to walk away, then half turned around again. "Though, maybe if you called her once in a while, you'd know." I scraped my lower jaw and my pride off the floor, walked out of the hospital. West Palm Beach ain't exactly the thrill capital of the world. That is to say, if you aren't for a rollicking round of bingo or a day at the High Life Fronton, there's not one heck of a lot to do. There is the beach, I reckon. Living in Los Angeles pretty well spoils you for such things. So I went to visit my cousin. Beth owned a condo in one of those god-awful prefab developments which litter the Florida landscape like broken shells on the beach. She worked for a bank and wasn't married, which is the extent of what I knew about her life. I had to call my dad to get her address. I don't even know how long it's been since I'd seen Beth. We've been close as children. We were born just 2 months apart, but that was ancient history. She was my mother's sister's only child and had somehow come to serve as kind of a caretaker to Sally after my aunt passed away. Neither of us had even bothered to attend the funeral of the other's mom. I didn't even think I'd be able to recognize Beth. When she opened the door, I was pleasantly surprised to find the face of the little girl I remembered etched inside the older-than-her-years lines of the woman I didn't even vaguely know. I hadn't bothered to call her right, but she wasn't surprised to see me. "Grandma said you'd be coming," she told me. I didn't believe it, though. "I'm not entirely sure why I'm here," I told her. We tried the small talk thing for a while, but it didn't go too well. I found her life in banking as dull as she found mine as a teacher. Neither of us was too keen to talk over good old days which didn't exist, so all that was left was Sally. Beth told me about the old woman's physical decline in rather clinical, unemotional terms. I got the strong feeling that Sally's glacially slow deterioration had worn Beth out. She basically told me what the nurse had said about Sally's health. A tumor, some angina there, old age everywhere. Beth shrugged between chain-smoked cigarettes. "And you don't know why she's been so adamant about wanting to see me?" I asked. "Not a fucking clue," Beth said. I could hear the resentment in her voice. Got the feeling that my seeing Sally was somehow treading on territory Beth thought of as her own. I couldn't blame her, really. I wasn't the one who'd been changing the old bag's diapers these past years. "Apparently it has something to do with Lily," I told her. Beth coughed out a cloud of smoke. "Aunt Lily?" she choked. "Yeah. She started telling me all about her before she dozed off. I haven't a clue as to why, though." "Unbelievable," Beth whispered, shaking her head. "What?" I asked. "I've been trying to get her to talk about Lily for years. I've asked her time after time, and she'd never tell me a goddamn thing." "Why do you want to know about Lily?" I asked. But somewhere a memory stirred in the back of my head. My mom used to talk about her a lot. She always thought there was something important about Lily. I wanted to make a film about her once. I remembered. From years before that in our very practical and deeply unimaginative family, Beth had been an artsy kid, dreamed of being a filmmaker. I never quite got it straight how she ended up working for a bank. Looking now at her tired face and nicotine-stained fingertips, I didn't want to ask. A hint of a smile formed at the edge of her lips. She was in the camps, you know," Beth said. "Excuse me?" "You don't know, do you?" Beth shook her head. Lily was in a concentration camp for a while during the Second World War. No, I said weakly. This was quite the day for family tales. I didn't know. How could she have been in the camps? Who told you this? My mom. But she didn't know much more than that either. It was something no one ever talked about, apparently. I'm not surprised, I said. But I was trying to picture the sweet old lady with candy who I remembered superimposed into one of those archive issue black and white images of Dachau or Treblinka we all have stowed in our heads. I couldn't suppress a shudder. What happened? I asked. Do you know? Beth got up and rooted around for another pack of cigarettes. She left me dangling while she fiddled with the wrapper, searched for some matches, and also deliberately lit up the smoke. You tell me what this is all about? Why Grandma wants to see you? What she says about Lily? Of course, I said. Why wouldn't I? Beth shrugged, and I realized it was information she would hoard. Come on, I said, please. I don't know that much, really, but I guess it's more than you. I realized all of a sudden that there was some deep resentment happening here, but didn't have a clue what it was all about. You know that Lily was in Poland right before the war. She went back to, nursemaid her brother-in-law or something. Grandma was just telling me about it. She said that Lily married a dead sister's husband, and there was a kid, too. Yeah, she said, and hesitated again. I summarized what Sally had told me in the hospital. Beth listened and nodded, seemed to think about it for a little while. I don't know the details, she finally said. I don't think any of the family really did. But Lily got rounded up by the Nazis at some point, just for being Jewish, far as I know. They all got herded into cattle cars. Lily was separated from the husband and the kid, but apparently she still had American papers or something. Anyway, she was in a camp for a while. I don't know which one. Not a death camp, obviously, but they let her go. I didn't think they ever let anyone go. Beth shrugged again. Who knows? A U.S. citizen, a woman. They probably just didn't give a shit. Or she was just fucking lucky. What about the brother-in-law? The husband, I mean. And the little boy? Soap, lampshades, ash, whatever. I winced at the harshness, the casual tone of my cousin's response. Jesus, I said. I don't think old J.C. was involved, Beth said, sucking in the last of the smoke. But you never know. Do you know anything else? Apparently, she waited out the war in Europe. Don't ask me where or how. She waited for the others. She never found them, of course. How did you find all this out? I asked again. My mom. She told me the whole story once when she was stoned. I must have looked at Beth oddly because she laughed and quickly explained, You never saw her during her postmenopausal hippie phase, did you? No, I admitted. Far out, literally. I'd get home from work and we'd share a joint. Man, you ain't lived till you'd had it out with your mom for bogarting a roach. I can only imagine, I said. Remembering my aunt as a suburban housewife, I really couldn't. Beth lit up another cigarette and neither of us said a word for a while. What must it have been like, I finally said. Beth raised an eyebrow. For Lily, I mean. Growing up hated by her brothers and sisters, treated like a piece of shit, finally finding a family only to lose it to the, what would that do to you? Beth didn't have an answer, but for the first time since I arrived, some of the hard edges fell out of her face. It's too bad you never got to make your film, I said. She turned away, ostensibly to reach for another cigarette, but through the swirl of smoke, I'm sure I saw a tear in the corner of one bloodshot eye. I got back to the hospital just after 6 that evening, walked into chaos. Sally had become hysterical, wanting to know where I was. Seemed that they could only dope her up with the mildest of sedatives, and she fought it tooth and nail. She just dozed off again when I arrived, much to the relief of the third-floor staff. I chatted with a couple of nurses who told me Sally had been driving them nuts for weeks. They all seemed to know who I was. Sally had been ranting to them about me and about Lily, though the connection was unclear. Went back to Sally's room to wait until she stirred. I stared out the window at a thunder squall breaking apart in the still hot Florida evening. I listened to the sizzle of the warm rain on concrete and to Sally's graveyard hack. I looked over at her as she began moaning lowly in her sleep, her drawn face contorting. Suddenly her eyes shot open and her face took on a frenzied expression. She started to yell, then saw me sitting by the window. The wildness went out of her eyes, and she settled back against the rumpled sheets. I asked her if she was all right, and she nodded. "I went to see Beth," I told her. "A good girl," Sally said, nodding. But her face suggested she hadn't entirely believed her own words. "We talked about what you were telling me. She said that Lily was once in a concentration camp, that she lost her family there." My grandmother looked up sharply, but wouldn't meet my eyes. She nodded again, and then looked down into the sheets as she spoke. "This is true," she said. "Terrible, terrible." She seemed to want to say more, but I don't think she could. "So what happened?" I prompted. "Lily, we brought back to New York after the war." "Wait," I said, "what happened to—" Sally just closed her eyes and started to shake her head, like a little kid throwing a tantrum. I half expected her to stick her fingers in her ears and yell blah, blah, blah to drown me out. I got the message. "Lily came back," she continued, "and she was like a child again. We all thought she would be different, maybe, but she barely could take care of herself. So a tiny apartment we found for her, cheap but close to where we lived. We took turns bringing her food when we could, and your mother—" She paused here, choking on the words. I felt a coldness roll through my bowel. "Your mother liked to go over to Lily and play. She kept Lily company, and Lily would sing to her." I thought I saw Sally's eyes moisten and felt a pang myself. I imagined it was the Polish lullaby that Lily sang to my mother. It was later yet that the trouble started. We hadn't been to see Lily for a while, and your mother wanted to visit. I made a kugel to take her. We knocked on her door, but she wouldn't open. Inside we could hear Lily talking and laughing, but to us there was no answer. I knocked, and your mother called out to her. We heard her voice, but still the door was shut. I began to think something is terrible wrong, so I went to get the super and made him to open the door. Sally paused for a moment, her eyes open wide. She seemed to be someplace else, looking at a picture from the past. Inside, Lily sat at her table. It's all set with the best china and a beautiful dinner. 2 other chairs also she had there, and she was serving food and laughing. Sally looked right at me now, streaks of moisture cutting across the damp crags in her old face. "Who was she talking to, Grandma?" Sally shook her head. "Dolls. 2 dolls, like made from schmatzes. She sat up in those chairs. She talked to them like they were people. She never looked at us, never saw. The super, he didn't say a word, just ran away fast as he could. I tried to talk to her, but Lily had not to hear. She just kept serving the food and talking to the dolls. One I heard her call Joseph, and the other Avram. Such a coldness I felt you shouldn't know. My heart still doesn't beat like it should when I think about it." "Were those the names of the husband and the boy, the ones who died?" I asked. Sally nodded painfully. "For days, only to the dolls, Lily would talk, and never to leave the house. We all went, but she didn't see through her eyes. We left her food and cleaned a little, not that she noticed. Finally, one day your grandpa and me went over, and the dolls were gone. We tried to ask her about it, but she made like she didn't know. Like a stone she was, like a golem. Long after she would go funny like this. Everything fine, and suddenly she went away to that other place, to be with the dolls." There was a long silence. I thought about the horrors of Lily's life, the terrible loss and the place her mind must have fled to escape from her memories. I thought again of my laughter that day so many years before, felt a rush of self-loathing. The nurse came in then and asked me to step out while she changed Sally's IV. I went into the men's room to piss and wash my face, but I couldn't look in the mirror as I stood at the sink. I settled back into the chair, saw the nurses had smoothed the sheets and fluffed the pillow. Sally still looked uncomfortable, but a fresh glass of orange juice with a flex straw sat on the tray by the bed. "Why are you telling me all this now, Grandma? Why did you want me to come here after so many years?" "It's Lily," she said. "Lily needs you." I exhaled slowly and deeply. I had no idea how to deal with this. Wished more than anything that I was back home in Los Angeles with only earthquakes and riots and semi-literate student essays to worry about. "Lily's dead, Grandma," I said as softly as I could. "I see her, Brucey," Sally said. Her eyes took on the most life I'd yet seen. "Every night she comes to me. I see her. Every night she tells me what it is has to be done. It's Brucey, she says. He's the only one who can do it." I didn't know what else to do but humor her. "Do what, Grandma?" Sally looked away from me, turned her head towards the tall curtain. She spoke without once looking back my way. "This what I tell you now, no one knows. Your grandpa and the others are all gone. Only me now. Your mother I never told, and I don't want you should say to anyone else, especially not your father." I was puzzled, but told her okay. Still, she wouldn't look at me. "Before Lily went back to Poland, there was a man. She was a foolish girl, Lily, but not so bad-looking. This man, he took advantage. You understand what I mean?" I swallowed and nodded. I may have blushed. "There was a baby. Lily, we knew, couldn't take care on her own, so we all decided that someone else had to look after the little girl, this child without a father and no kind of a mother. It was agreed your grandfather and me should be the ones to take care of her. Always like our own we treated her. Never we told her the truth. We sent Lily away not just for Bella's family in Poland, but for ours, for yours, for your mother." Senility, I thought, a drug-induced fantasy brought on by a lifetime of guilt over the mistreatment of her sister. Surely that explained Sally's belief that the long-dead Lily came to see her, and the other grotesque fantasy. I was tired and annoyed that this was what I had come all this way for, inconvenienced my life about, till Sally turned and faced me, and I looked into her eyes. And I just knew, it was all true. "Oh, Jesus, Grandma," I said, "Jesus Christ. A terrible thing this has been to keep inside so many years, but it was the only way. Before the war was a thing that was done, and after, I was in shock. The thought that Lily was my real grandmother sent me into new paroxysm of guilt. Looked back out the window. The rain had stopped, and a setting sun made its final appearance of the day. "What does Lily want me to do?" I asked, mostly to fill the deadly silence, intending sarcasm. Sally didn't seem to notice. "Lily wants you should find her son." I'd already seen the in-flight movie, but sought refuge in it again to avoid my troubled thoughts. After an hour, I surrendered and stuffed the cheap plastic headphones back into the seat pocket and stared out at the clouds. I thought of poor Lily, Grandma, for Christ's sake, the nightmare of her life. I racked my brain till my head ached, trying to remember something more about her, the details of how she looked and dressed, the inflections of her voice, the things she said, anything, but it was no use. Came down every time to that damn dog, my hellish laughter, and her sweet, sad song. Back in the hospital, Sally had told me that every night it was the same. She'd wake with a start, and though she could feel the hospital bed beneath her, hear the blips and bleeps of her various monitors, she could also see her old Brooklyn apartment. The door would open, and a youthful Lily stood there, naked and pregnant, with the daughter that Sally would claim as her own. Lily would drift in like a balloon and float around the room. Sally would reach out for her. Lily always bobbed out of reach. As she wafted through the air, she rubbed at her swollen belly. Tears streamed off her troubled face. Lily told Sally how her adopted son had survived the Nazi killing machine, had been adopted by a Christian family not very far from the Sobibor death camps which had claimed his father. The boy was a boy no longer, Lily said, but he was in terrible trouble. He lived now not in Europe but in Montreal, where his adopted parents had emigrated. Her grandson, me, she told Sally, had to go to this place to save him from some terrible thing. What it was, or how it was to be done, she would or could not say. But the son of the daughter she had been denied was the only one who could act. Only through the daughter that was stolen could she redeem the son who had been lost. As Sally told me the story, and no doubt saw my dubious expression, she grew increasingly frantic. I tried to convince her that it was just a recurring dream, but she'd have none of it. She insisted it was real, and her nights had become a kind of torture. She clutched at my arm and dug her nails into my flesh, pleading with me to honor Lily's wish and make good the offenses of her past. She gasped for breath like a runner at the end of a marathon. Her voice became a shrill chalkboard scratch as she begged me to promise to fulfill Lily's plea. "What do you expect me to do?" I yelled at her. "What do you expect? Am I supposed to scour a foreign city to find some old Polish guy and tell him his dead mother sent me to be his guardian angel? This is crazy." "No," she told me. "His new name Lily told to me. Wajda. Stefan Wajda. And where he lives even. You have to promise me, Brucey. You have to." I tried to protest again, but she started to scream. I couldn't believe, frail as she was, that the old lady could muster such intensity. The ivy was slipping out of her arm, and spittle and mucus exploded from her lips and nose. I feared she was about to stroke out. "Promise!" Sally shrieked. "Promise! Promise!" "I promise," I finally said in desperation. "I do. I promise." She calmed down as soon as the words passed my lips and collapsed back onto the bed. "Yeah," I thought in the merciful quiet. "I promise. And I love you, and the check's in the mail, and I won't. I promise," I thought again, silently mouthing the words as the plane descended into the Christmas tree fantasy of lights that is Los Angeles. Shit. I awoke to the starkest moment of terror in my life. I've always been jealous of people who can remember their dreams, because I never do. At most, I usually recall an image or a feeling that melts like a vampire in the morning sun. This dream, though, was as real and solid to me as my own name. It was Lily, of course, what had to be the horrid Brooklyn tenement where she spent her life after the war. I saw her sitting at a rickety table heaped with plates piled with bones and gristle and rotten fruit. She stood between two high-backed chairs, each with a midget-sized rag doll perched on it. Sawdust stuffing spilled out of the gaping holes, and button eyes hung off torn faces by frayed black thread. One doll had an arm of real flesh, with a bluish-black number etched into the peeling skin. The other was slighter, but no less ragged. Lily forced sharpened spoonfuls of grayish meat between their tight-sewn lips. I tried to move towards the table, but hung suspended, like an insect in amber, condemned to watch. I looked at Lily, and for a moment saw my mother's face ripple across her countenance like a slight Florida wave lapping across a sandbar. Lily looked up at me. Tears of blood flowed from her soft eyes and ran down her cheeks in jagged streaks. She opened her mouth, and through blackened teeth, the horrid sound that emerged was the world's sorrow. I woke with a start and dashed into the bathroom to throw up. I ran cold water over my wrists and splashed my face, rinsed my mouth. I stumbled back to bed, but sleep was out of the question. I lay awake, thinking and shivering, though the night air was quite warm. As the first gray finger of dawn poked a hole in the darkness, I got up and went to the phone. I looked up the Montreal area code in the phone book and dialed the number for information. In a voice as dry as a perfect martini, I asked if there was a listing for Stefan Wajda. Apologized for not having an address. The line was quiet for 2 unendurable moments. "Thank you," a computer-generated voice said. "The number is..." Fresh doubts assailed me as the plane hit turbulence near Salt Lake. I thought again of the crazy phone call that sent me packing, considered the possibility, the likelihood, that the Stefan Wajda I was going to see was a mere namesake of Lily's lost son. Was Wajda the Polish equivalent of Smith or Jones? Still, I was so shaken by the reality of someone by that name in the city of which Sally spoke that in a less than rational moment, I booked the flight. Didn't have a clue what I was going to do when I got there. I thought again about Sally and about Lily and my terrible dream. I kept coming back to that brief moment in the dream when my mother's face flashed across Lily, and knew that this was about her as much as anything else. My mother had died, rather horribly, of cancer while I was at college, drinking and screwing and having fun. I hadn't wanted to face the horrors of her condition, just as at a younger age I found a way not to face Lily's death, and more recently had avoided dealing with Sally's decline. The promise I'd made to Sally, I knew, meant nothing in and of itself. I could tell myself it was the reason for this insane excursion, but in that deep mental pit where we live with our unspeakable truths, I knew that this was about my mother. It was about a kind of expiration, a purging, about the debts and respect we each owe to our past. Ain't guilt grand. I called an old college friend named Dornan who lived in Montreal. He met me at the airport. He was a bit puzzled by the sudden visit, but had happily agreed to put me up for a few days. He seemed to sense that I had something on my mind, but didn't pry. We reminisced some about the good old days as we drove back to his apartment. He already had a date arranged for the evening, invited me, sincerely, to tag along, but I told him no, I had something to do. I was exhausted, physically and mentally, but grew restive shortly after Dornan went out. I snooped among his many bookshelves and found the City white page on the third shelf, wedged between copies of Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism and Art Spiegelman's Maus. I briefly puzzled over his organizational scheme, but my head hurt too much already. There was only one Wajda S in the book. The address listed was for Rue Saint-Cuthbert. A quick look at a map showed it to be a street within walking distance of Dornan's place. I stuffed the map in my pocket and carefully shut the door behind me. Wajda Street was yuppie ritzy with lots of black Saabs and BMWs parked in front of restored brownstones. It was quiet, with only the omnipresent background rush of the city to break the silence. The house matching Wajda's number stood at the end of the block. A great maple tree by his gate whispered in the warm night breeze. Through a small square of leaded glass in the front door, I saw the glow of a dim yellow bulb. The rest of the house looked dark and empty. I leaned on the gate at the entrance path and stared at the door, unsure of what to do. What the hell was I supposed to do? It was almost 11 o'clock at night. I could hardly go up and knock at this hour. What would I say? I must have looked pretty damn suspicious lurking out front. There was no one else on the street. Not a single car passed while I waited. What the fuck am I doing here? I thought. I suddenly felt ridiculous. Was prepared to turn around and head back to Dornan's place, discounting the whole trip as temporary insanity, when I noticed the sound of an idling automobile engine. I glanced around at the parked cars. They were all dark and lifeless. Cautiously, I opened the gate at the front of the house and took a few steps up the path. The low rumble grew slightly louder. I found my way around the side of the building and saw that there was a garage in back that opened onto a narrow alley running the length of the block. I pressed an ear to the corrugated steel door and heard and felt a deep bass reverberation from within. I stood there for a minute, listening to the steady throb of the idol. I tried peering under the garage door, but no trace of light filtered out from inside. I glanced down the dark alley, but like the street, there wasn't a sign of life. Just a long row of locked garages. As I stood there, a sick feeling overcame me with the suddenness of a heart attack. A sheen of nervous sweat oozed from my pores. My tongue went thick and dry in my mouth. I started to knock, then pound on the garage door, called Wajda's name at the top of my voice. When there was no response but the engine's throaty hum, I began to kick at the door with all my strength. I saw some lights go on in nearby windows, but I ignored them. I tried to turn the handle, but the garage door was locked and wouldn't budge. I kicked it again, trying to force the mechanism. Someone next door leaned out the window and yelled at me in French, but I didn't stop to respond. Instead, I dashed back around the house and leaped up the steps to the front door. I tried the knob, but of course it too was locked. I pounded on the door and stabbed repeatedly at the bell without result. I stopped and thought carefully about my choices. If I was wrong, Dornan would likely be bailing me out of a Montreal jail, and I was going to have to make up one hell of a story. But if it was what I feared, I saw a small garden spade among the shrubs and used it to break the thin square of glass in the front door, knocking jagged shards into the hall. I snaked my arm through the window and opened the locks, cutting my elbow on a tiny piece of glass. I dashed about the house looking for a way into the garage, and ran madly from room to room till I realized I was one floor above the level of the back alley. I tried every door I came to until I found a flight of stairs leading down. I couldn't feel the light switch, crashed into a second door at the bottom. I flung that door open and smashed it into the dark headlights of the idling car. I was nearly overcome by the noxious carbon monoxide fumes. A bare 30-watt bulb suspended from the ceiling had come on when I opened the door, illuminating the narrow garage. I gagged and covered my mouth and nose, peering through the smoke towards the driver's side. Slumped over the wheel of a Mercedes, I saw the wan outline of a figure, one hand dangling out of the open window. Coughing and retching, I ran around to the driver's door, but I could only open it a few inches before it scraped against the garage wall. I tugged at the limp body, but he was too heavy for me to pick up. I touched his hand. It felt warm, but I couldn't find a pulse. Not that I ever could. I switched off the engine and squeezed past to the back of the car. At the base of the garage door, I saw that sheets and towels had been firmly wedged into all the gaps. I kicked them aside and reached for the handle. The door opened readily from the inside. I heaved it open as far as I could, took a deep gulp of the fresh night air. I hurried back inside and released the car's emergency brake. Then I went around front and, bracing myself against the garage wall, pushed the car backwards with my legs. It rolled slowly, but the garage floor was on a slight grade. With another shove, the car picked up speed, scooted out of the garage and into the alley until it crashed loudly into a solid brick wall across the way. I ran out behind it, gasping for a clean breath. In the alley, several neighbors had come to investigate the ruckus. Through blurry eyes, I saw a thin man in a red bathrobe pull Wajda out of the car and start to administer CPR. I heard the sound of approaching sirens even as I dizzily fell forward, the Mercedes hood ornament looming my vision like a harvest moon. I sat in the back of an ambulance while a uniformed policeman interviewed me, and a paramedic dressed a cut on my arm and a small gash on my forehead. I gave them Dornan's address and told them Wajda was a friend of a friend who I didn't know, but had been told to look up while I was in town. The cop asked me what led me to check the garage or even suspect that anything was wrong. I glanced away, shook my head, and told him the truth. "I don't know," I said. "Just a feeling." The cop didn't look happy, but he had one of those faces that probably never did. The crowd started to disperse as the ambulance sped off. I made eye contact with the man in the red bathrobe and went over to talk to him. He nodded as I approached and cinched his belt. He had bony legs. We watched for a moment as the last of the police pulled out of the alley, then introduced ourselves. "Hell of a thing this, eh?" he said. "You have no idea," I said. "You're a friend of Steve's, then?" "Relative," I said with a half-smile. "Is that right? So you must know what this is about, then." "A boot," he said, like a good Canadian. I shook my head nervously. "Distant relative. Several times removed, you might say, and then some." "The wife and kid, I figure." My new friend nodded. "How's that?" I asked, my gut starting to roil. "What about his wife and kid?" "Don't you know?" he asked in that special voice reserved for the perversely joyful presentation of lurid news. "Killed just a couple weeks ago. Car accident, don't you know. The boy was quite young, considering Steve's age. Terrible thing, just awful. Suppose it was all too much for him." I must have visibly blanched because the man asked if I was all right. I nodded and mumbled something about the effects of the evening. He clucked sympathetically, patted me on the shoulder as we said goodbye. I walked for a while, a few hours actually, till I didn't know where I was and eventually found a cab. I started to give the driver Dornan's address, but something suddenly changed my mind. I told him to take me to the hospital. I needed to know how Wajda was, make sure he'd made it okay. I wanted to see him again. I emptied my mind as we drove, too numb to think or try and understand what had happened, how I got here, what it meant that Sally had really known about what was going to happen. I pressed my bruised forehead against the cool glass of the air-conditioned cab, let the lights of Montreal dance and shimmer in my fuzzy vision. At the front desk, I was told that Wajda's condition was listed as guarded. I would have to wait until morning for more details. I got his room number and thanked the receptionist. Then, for reasons I can't entirely explain, I snuck around to a deserted hospital entrance. I tried to appear officious as I walked the quiet halls. No one even looked at me twice. I hesitated outside his room. With a quick glance around, I eased the door open. Wajda's wrists were secured to the guardrails as a precaution, and ivy dripped into his left arm. I looked carefully at his thin, ashen face in the faint fluorescent glow. It was crazy to expect him to look like Lily. He was, I reminded myself, her blood nephew, not her son, but I thought I detected a trace of the family genes in his sharp-ridged cheeks and deep-set eyes. He seemed to be breathing well. I somehow felt sure he was going to be fine. That my bizarre journey of redemption, a trip I could never hope to truly understand, was over. I tried to sneak back out when my cousin's eyes opened and he looked up at me. I froze as I saw a mixture of puzzlement and fear across his face. I was tempted to bolt, but he dragged his tongue across chapped lips. I really didn't know if he should have water, but there was a cup and a pitcher beside the bed, so I figured it would be okay. I poured out 2 fingers' worth and held the cup to his lips. He lifted his head slightly and dabbed at it gingerly with his tongue. I put the cup aside and he smiled at me. For ever so slight a moment, I thought I saw my mother's face in his. I don't know what made me do it. It certainly wasn't a conscious thing. I started to sing Lily's song. With the second note, his expression went wide as the western sky. As I sang, I saw tears pool in his eyes, felt them fall down my own cheeks. When I got to the last line, he sang it too, the voice as slight as a rose petal. Never let anyone know. I fell asleep almost as soon as I got back home to L.A., and I dreamed. At least I think it was a dream. It was strange, because I could sort of make out the familiar contours of my bedroom in the background. I found myself staring at Lily's apartment again. This time the light was bright and soft, the air rich with the oniony smell of good home cooking. The table had been set for one, the plate heaped with steaming potato latkes and sour cream and a big bowl of borscht. Lily stood in the kitchen, fussing over the stove, sweetly humming her little tune. She looked up at me for a moment and passed a wisp of a smile. Then she turned back to her cooking. The telephone woke me up. I mean, if I was asleep. The smell of fresh latkes seemed to linger in the air, and it made me wonder. I stumbled over to the receiver and mumbled a hello. It was my father calling from New York. Where had I been, he demanded. He'd been calling all night. I made up a story about visiting friends in Santa Barbara and stayed over when I hadn't planned to. What was the big deal, I asked. He yelled a little more, then calmed himself down. He was calling, he said, because he had some bad news. My grandmother had died in a hospital in Florida. I didn't bother to correct him about her identity, but I asked what had happened. Nothing, he said. She died during the night, peacefully, in her sleep. The red rose cries, she is near, she is near. The white rose weeps, she is late. The larkspur listens, I hear, I hear. The lily whispers, I wait. Alfred Lord Tennyson.